Hey everyone, welcome back to Continuous Thunder. Today we're going to talk about the new album from Gary Clark Jr., This Land, out now on Warner Brothers Records. Gary Clark Jr. is a musician from Austin, Texas, who plays rock music with fusions of blues, jazz, soul, and R&B music. He's actually been active since the 90s and put out a couple small independent releases in the early 2000s. But it wasn't until around 2010 that his self-titled EP started showing up on streaming radio sites like Pandora or Last.fm. This no doubt led to him being signed by Warner Brothers Records and releasing his debut, Black and Blue, in 2012. Since then, he has toured extensively, released 2 live albums and 2 other studio albums, including this one. Recently, he's had a bit of a surge in popularity due to providing a song for the Justice League movie, which was a cover of the Beatles' Come Together, which I'm certain that decision was based on the fact that his song Numb from Black and Blue sounds like a fuzzed out Come Together already. So someone who was making a decision on the movie probably heard that song and said, hey, let's call this guy and have him cover Come Together for the movie. But another reason for his recent popularity was the release of the very politically and emotionally charged song This Land and its music video. Obviously the lead single and title track of this album. Now, if you're like me, you probably heard Bright Lights or Don't Owe You a Thing 9 years ago and were just blown away. In 2010, the Black Keys released Brothers, and the White Stripes had released Under Great White Northern Lights, which would end up being their last major release before breaking up. Gary Clark Jr. seemed like the savior of the fuzzed out blues music. But then when Black and Blue came out, you might have been a little disappointed whenever you found out that it wasn't entirely a blues record. There was soul and R&B, and it wasn't bad. It still had that fuzzy edge to it, but it wasn't a new thick freakness. And unfortunately, Clark continues to disappoint me. But let's start with the good. This Land starts off very strong with the title track, which is a very angry and hard-edged rock song that calls out the modern racism that Clark deals with even now in 2019. Another highlight is the last track on the standard edition, Dirty Dishes Blues, which sounds like a traditional Delta blues song played on an archtop electric guitar through a cranked old tweed amp. Other notable tracks are What About Us, which rides on the energy from the album opener, and When I'm Gone, which pulls inspiration from 50s rock and roll and Motown. Another honorable mention is The Governor, which is a small lo-fi acoustic blues song, but it's too short and only repeats the same verse twice. I really wish he could have fleshed that one out a bit more. Which brings me to the not so good. And first off, this album is long. The standard edition is a couple minutes over an hour, and the 2 bonus tracks bring the total runtime to over 70 minutes. And unless you're creating some sort of epic masterpiece, that's a lot to ask of your listener. Along with that, Clark can't seem to decide who he wants to be on this album. The influences are so far flung, and there's not a lot tying them together. And the things that do aren't very good. Let's start with the worst offenders. Gotta Get Into Something is a punk/garage rock song that has an annoyingly repetitive chorus and doesn't really say anything interesting. Along with that is Got to Get Up, which, if I was guessing, was an attempt at capturing the feel of a sample-based DJ cut in a live studio. It has horns and just repeats the phrases "got to get up and kill 'em all" over and over with a guitar solo over it. Getting a little better are songs where Clark insists on singing the whole thing in a falsetto, which really isn't a strong point of his voice. These are I Walk Alone, Feed the Babies, and Pearl Cadillac, which is a shame because a couple of these songs have really nice sentiments, but I'm just too distracted from them by the voice. Then there's a few tracks where Clark feels like he's shooting for a turn-of-the-century Santana vibe with the style of the song and the way he plays his guitar solos over them. Think like the Supernatural or the Shaman era Santana. The rest of the tracks are pretty forgettable. And I don't know if it's fair to comment on the bonus tracks, but they feel like unfinished afterthoughts, and I wouldn't even waste your time with them. Perhaps my biggest complaint is that Gary Clark Jr. is branded as a guitarist, or at the very least a guitar-centric artist. But on this album, he kind of feels like a YouTube gear demo guy that got a record deal. There are moments where the mix on the guitar doesn't match the mix on the rest of the track, and on others he'll use inappropriate effects for the song. And in a couple cases, he flat out makes mistakes. He goes off time and he'll miss bends. And some people might defend him and say that adds authenticity or character to his blues playing. And that might mean something if this album was recorded in a basement like the Black Keys' first couple albums, but it wasn't. This is a major production on Warner Brothers Records. Mistakes like this are almost inexcusable at this level. With all of that, I give this album a 1.5 out of 5. The really great message on the strong opening title track is just really weighed down by a bunch of mediocre songs with bad decisions and a really long runtime. I feel like you could trim a lot of the tracks out of this album and turn it into a shorter listen that would be worthy of a slightly better score. In fact, I kind of did this. If you go on Spotify and you search a playlist called This Land Abridged, I cut out 7 tracks and half an hour of runtime and turned it into a much more enjoyable experience. That if it was the version of this album that was released, I probably would have given it a higher score. But that's going to do it for this edition of Continuous Thunder. Now I'd like to know your thoughts. Did you listen to this album? Did you like it? Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? You can go ahead and leave all that down in the comments. You can also leave suggestions for the next thing that I should review. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell if you want to know when I have new content coming out. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.